giving my presentation today on the impact of social involvement in local politics. I'm pretty much just encouraging you guys to get out there, and if you have a concern that's going on in your community, just how to voice that concern. So I'd like to start off my presentation with a quote from local representative Warren Kampf. So I actually had the opportunity to interview him for this presentation, and I asked him just to give me one statement on why local politics is important to him, and this is what he said. He said, "Our way of life depends on local politics. Our system of government in Tredyffrin and in Pennsylvania and in our nation expect our citizens to participate in our community, and we absolutely depend on it. Whether it's running for office, volunteering time for a local charity, or running for the township board, those are critical parts of the American way of life." So I'd like to segue into a portion where I'm going to discuss mass movements that are going on around this country that you may not think about it, but actually started at the local level. So the first topic I'd like to discuss is LGBT and the civil rights movement. So right now it's a huge topic across the country from coast to coast. There's a huge social movement to push for legislature allowing LGBT couples and people in domestic partnerships the same values and experiences that traditional marriage families encounter. So we see that this movement actually started in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts was able to pass legislation that ensured domestic partnership, partners in a domestic partnership, it's kind of redundant, I guess, certain tax reliefs and certain benefits of married couples. And this soon spread to California, and then to Connecticut, and then to Iowa. These are just very few of the states that actually are passing legislation now, but this is where it started. Second of all, I'd like to talk about a movement that started back in 2009 when Obama suggested that we raise the fuel economy standards in this country to not only reduce GHG emissions, which are greenhouse gas emissions, but also save us money. So what he suggested is that by 2014, which is this year, that car manufacturers there's a mandate that they have to make cars that get at least 36 miles to the gallon. But this movement actually started in California. So they were actually able to place really strong legislation that enforced this law. And since it was so successful, Obama picked it up for the federal scale. Now this is kind of a hot button issue, and I don't want to get too far into it because this is where opinion and bias kicks in. But with Obamacare, if it had a platform, it would be universal health care. Regardless of socioeconomic status, we need everybody in this country to have health care. But this idea actually started in Massachusetts with Mitt Romney. So Mitt Romney mandated universal health care in the state of Massachusetts, and it was so incredibly successful that Obama actually modeled Obamacare after that. Now granted, there are a lot of nuances where both sides disagree, but at its core, that's the we see. So far we have the LGBT rights movement beginning in Massachusetts. We have the raising of fuel economy standards by cutting GHG emissions for cars, started in California. And then we have the universal health care reforms starting in Massachusetts. So for the second part of my presentation, I was able to talk to a couple people in the community that are from this area originally, and really felt that there was a lot of misrepresentation in the area, and decided that they wanted to make a difference and make an impact for certain things that concern them in this area. So the first person I was able to interview is this guy named Mike Parrish. So some of you may recognize Mike Parrish because he actually runs a lot of the West Point recruiting from Conestoga. And so if you are doing anything related to the Army, ROTC, anything like that, then you probably recognize him. So he was an Army brat, so his dad was in the Army, and he moved around the country his entire childhood. He lived in Europe for a bit, he lived in Asia for a bit. He also grew up in the 60s, which is really prominent, which really sculpted his like socio-political views. Because this is during the time of the 3 minutes. Okay, this is during like the race riots and a lot of the early LGBT movements. So he actually went to West Point. He was in the Army for a bit, and then he started an environmentalist group that he's now the CEO of out in Westchester, called Delco Resources, where he was able to give back jobs to people in this community and give funding to small interest groups that couldn't necessarily have the access to it. So I asked him what was the most important thing about running for office because he ran for the 6th district, and he said grassroots level involvement is the most productive because one person talks to 10, who talks to 10 more, and then soon thousands are involved. Now this is something as easy as canvassing, as easy as going door to door and just voicing your personal concern. And a huge part of his platform was that we can't complain without getting involved, we can't stand idle by, and we have to put up or shut up. He had a very harsh like fiscal views, and he feels that in this area we're being misrepresented, and so that's why he was running to correct that. The second person I was able to talk to is Warren Kampf, who's the representative in the 157th. So he actually grew up on Devon State Road, which is in this district. He went to Yale and then to Emory, so he left for a bit but then came back, and he actually worked fairly recently on a local zoning board and as township supervisor because he felt that certain things that he expected from his local government just wasn't being met. So he's right now in the House, he's actually sponsoring this bill called the Innovate PA bill, which is putting $75 million into seed venture capital arms. So what this means is they're going out to local communities, much like our district, and they're giving money to people who don't necessarily have the resources to get the materials they need to succeed. And there's a guy actually stationed out on Trooper Road, which is in the 157th district, and he created this machine that's kind of like a scan. It's a scanner, and it can sense like head trauma for veterans and people overseas, so that we can better diagnose what they might have. And the thing that he created and got funding from PA is actually used across the world now and across the country as well. Here, I'll just skip about that. All right. So I'd just like to end with how I got started and how I actually became involved in local politics. So a couple of years back, I started realizing that I didn't really agree with a lot of things that were going on locally, and I wanted to get involved, and I wanted to support candidates that I knew would do what I wanted to in this community. So I came across this guy, Manon Trivedi. I'm sure a couple of you at least know his name. So he ran for the 6th district in 2012, and I canvassed for his campaign. I did lid dropping, a lot of like bottom level kind of jobs, but it was really interesting to kind of see how campaigns were run from the ground level. Through this opportunity, I was actually able to be in contact with. Somebody want to talk? So through this opportunity, I was actually able to be put in contact with the different township Democrats, and they offered me an internship position, and so I worked there over the summer. I was able to work with a lot of local candidates. As you can see, the top couple are just like larger scale campaigns that I worked for. Obviously, Obama, I wasn't very high up in that at all. Manon Trivedi, Mark Painter, who actually is in our district, but I was able to work for him as well. And then Katie McGinty, who's running for governor. And then as you can see on these names, maybe you recognize some of them. I actually worked with Murph Wysocki, Mark Freed, who has a daughter, Paulina Freed here, Kevin Burks and Scott Dorsey, who has 2 kids, Martin Dorsey and Raven Dorsey, you might know. And I helped them get elected because I feel I was in full support of what they had to say. So, sorry I'm kind of going over, but I just wanted to leave you with the idea that if I can encourage you to do anything today, it's go out and make sure your voice is heard and make sure that your opinion matters. Whether it's like volunteering for a small interest group that you think it isn't going to make an impact, I guarantee